Hello, I'm Mayor Tom Carlson. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the Mayor's Roundtable. My guest today is visiting Springfield to talk about the effects of gangs on communities like ours. Steve Novacek is the director of the Mayor's Office for Youth Services for the city of North Little Rock, Arkansas. He is visiting Springfield to speak at several schools and a community forum on his research into gangs. In fact, we are on location today at Pipkin Middle School, which is one of the sites where Steve spoke during his two-day stay here. I'd like to thank Pipkin for hosting our program today. And Steve, I'd like to welcome you here.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Happy to be here.
Well, I was at your program the other night, and it was amazing to me how many people in this community turned out. You've really struck a chord here. I've gone to these things for years, and I'm right at 500 people. I'm pretty good at counting crowds were there to hear about your program. Do you think the reason is because we have a real problem here in our community? Or did you see that kind of response?
It was a hugely successful response. The community partnership did a wonderful job in getting the information out about it. I don't think that Springfield has a problem that is out of control by any stretch of the imagination. But what I am seeing here are the very beginnings of things that we saw in the Little Rock area in the early 90s, just prior to our homicide rate being greater per capita than it was in New York City and Los Angeles. The critical difference between the timing in this community, what's happening here now, is that you have a lot of things already in place that the community already has, that is lucky to have people that are already dealing and facing these issues, because it's really the second time around. In the last 10 or 12 years ago, much of the nation suffered with these sorts of problems, and now they seem to be recycling again for whatever the reason is.
So now you don't feel then that a gang issue is one that is just peculiar to some communities? You see it all across the country?
No, yes, sir. Gangs are, according to the latest statistics, there's probably 1 million identified gang members in the United States. The FBI has released that recently, that there's probably 1 million that have been identified, which is probably a low number because not every community has identified.
They all don't report on the census, do they?
Exactly. They don't report on census. So there's really no telling how many that there are, and it's not a reflection on any particular community because they exist. I know that a recent study I saw by the National Gang Crime Information Center said that 100% of the cities in the United States with a population of 250,000 or more have gang activity. So it is not a reflection on any community. And one of the things that I frequently tell people is that you have to be careful about raising such a hubbub about it that your community leaders will dig in, that they don't want to admit that they have the problem because they're afraid that the constituency will blame them. But this is something that no particular person can be blamed. We need to get past the blame and get on with just fixing the problem. I always tell people, go ahead and blame me. See, I've been in your community for 2 days, and everybody can blame it on me, and I'm leaving town, and then I can leave everybody here to fix the problem. So you have...
Well, I'm going to stop you right there. Is it a problem that can be fixed?
Yes. It is a problem that can be fixed. One of the things that we preach in our community, and that I preach, I visited over 40 states since I left my job as coroner at the end of 1994. I always preach that to beat gangs in a community, you compete with them. That means you have to fully understand why they're so attractive to young people, and you offer those young people those things in another location, in a positive way, in a positive location. And I found that in my travels across the country that if you offer a young person a positive path and a negative path, they almost always will choose the positive path. But the secret is the community has to have that positive path for the young person to follow.
Well, I didn't really touch on it in the introduction here, but why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got into this?
Be happy to. I was the county coroner in Little Rock from 1983 until the end of 1994. Prior to that, I served as the director of the crime laboratory, which Governor Clinton at the time, soon to be president, appointed me to run the crime lab. And prior to that, I was the coroner in another county in Arkansas. So I've served for 25 years. All I did was investigate death. Now, toward the end of my career in Pulaski County in the early 1990s, our homicide rate spiraled out of control. We had the highest homicide rate per capita in the entire United States. It was greater even than Los Angeles and New York in 92, 93, and 94. A big part of the reason for that was we had a lot of young people who didn't have things to do, who were milling around on the streets. Along came these negative role models, negative, actually gang recruiters from the large communities, and recruited our kids to sell drugs for them. Coincidentally, about the same time, crack hit the streets. So we had those two amazing catalysts that came together, kids with nothing to do and people selling crack cocaine that needed more people to sell them. So it just naturally brought a lot of young people in our community into it. Now, what I was doing as the coroner was trying to determine why our homicide rate had gone from 38 when I took office in '83 to 111 in 1993 without a corresponding rise in our population base. And what I found was that many young people that were on the streets belonged to what I call the 5H Club. The 5 H's are helpless, hopeless, homeless, hungry, and hugless. So if you have a kid who's in the 5H Club, who's seeking identity, recognition, belonging, discipline, love, and respect, and those are the big 6 reasons that kids get in gangs, well, they're going to join whatever's available to them. And if it happens to be a gang leader, or if it happens to be somebody from the Boys and Girls Club, somebody doing outreach,
but your point is
they
they're
will
going to
follow
find
them.
it somewhere.
They will find it somewhere. So it's better for a community to be prepared to deal with that, to not worry about why we're having this issue here, but just to get on and deal with it. And those communities that are the most successful in dealing with this are those that balance intervention and prevention with suppression and enforcement. So that means for every cop you have, for every court you have, for every jail you have, you also have to have people out here on the streets doing prevention and intervention. And those communities that are successful in dealing with it are those that meld those two things together.
And I don't know if this is still true, but and if my impression's wrong, please correct me. But my sense is that for in the school system in Little Rock, that a lot of the middle class had left it,
right.
And the people had they'd gone to a lot of them to private schools and so forth like that, and so there wasn't the I don't know how to express exactly, but there wasn't the connectedness of the community and the school systems and a viewpoint that we're all in this together.
Right. A lot of people had a tendency to say this is somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
This is their problem, not our problem. But it's everybody's problem. I mean, when you think about it, when you think about the number of these young people that are being shot up or the number of these young people that are shoplifting, those sorts of things affect all of us. Because the greatest majority of young people that are injured by the violence on the street, they don't have any sort of insurance. So you and I and the taxpayers end up paying for those things. So it does have a broad effect on the entire community, not to mention on the morale of the community. When you have young people who are being shot up or young people who are fearful to go to school or young people that go to bed hungry, I mean, that has an effect, a chilling effect on the entire community.
Well, how do you get a community to care about an issue?
You just have to make the community understand that we are all in this together. And regardless of your political leanings, it does take this whole village to raise a child. I mean, everybody has to be involved. This is an issue that has a great effect on the entire community. Businesses in the community. I can tell you a way that it affects the business community by telling you this little story. A friend of mine in Little Rock who is in the realty business, and he primarily sells real estate to people who are developing plants and large real estate. I picked up a fellow for a $10 million, he was looking at a $10 million plant to open in our community. Picked him up at the airport, drove him through this industrial part of town. On the way, this fellow from Chicago said, what is this community doing about the gang issue? And Rollins said, I looked at him and I said, what gang issue? And the guy said, take me back to the airport, because I am not going to bring my people into a community where they are not facing this issue. And I saw all this graffiti. I knew what it meant. I'm from Chicago. So this guy lost a $10 million sale. So it has a chilling effect. That's why businesses...
You can't sweep it under the rug.
No, you cannot. You cannot. You must face it head on. In the dictionary and on the street, denial comes just before disaster. Now, what's great about this community, there's no denial. I mean, it's hard to deny the existence. I've been in several schools over the last couple of days, and one of the things I do in the schools is I ask young people, how many of you hear gunshots in your neighborhoods? How many of you know people who are in gangs? And it was amazing here at the number of hands that went up in all the schools we visited. So I know that the rumblings are there. The kids know that it exists, and they're truly your experts. So why not, on the front end, say, look, we are a community who's going to deal with this. We're not going to allow it to happen. This happens everywhere. It's not a reflection on Springfield because it's happened. Not a reflection on the mayor, not a reflection on the chief of police or the prosecutor or the city council. It just is happening across the nation. Some communities are caught surprised. They're very surprised by it because they don't want to deal with it. But you cannot deny the existence. Springfield's not. So now you're in the next phase, and that is we're going to compete. We're not going to allow the gangs to have one more of our children. We're not going to allow them to kill one more of our children. We're not going to allow them to recruit one more of our children. We're not going to allow them to sell drugs to one more of our children.
Well, these gangs, and I'm sure you said there were 1 million people, so there's just going to be generalities. I'm sure that there are specific attributes to them, to a particular one. But are they a bunch of teenage kids running around, or is there sort of an older guy that's kind of really making a lot of money and having these young ones do his bidding? What's the structure, if I could, of a typical gang?
There's a couple. Usually what happens is when you have a group of neighborhood kids, and that's sort of what's happening now. I had the opportunity to chat with a couple of the gang officers here last night, and they're seeing the same thing we're seeing across the nation, that neighborhood groups are forming up as a little clique, posse, or crew to hang out with one another. Well, that cohesive nature of that is very attractive to a gang leader or to a drug dealer who says, look, here's already a little group in place. I can come in, motivate them, give them an identity, tell them that, okay, now you're members of the Gangster Disciples or the Crips or the Bloods or the Vice Lords or whatever their particular gang is, and they offer them that structure, they offer them a little bit of money, and pretty soon, wacko, you've got a gang. So that's one of the ways that they happen. Now, another way is that people come and actually recruit young people to become gang members. There's generally 3 ways that they get here. They're recruited, or you have individuals who are transferred here from other communities to live with parents or to get into your school system because the school system they came from was bad. The difficult thing in that is it's easy to take a kid out of the gang and move them, but if you don't take the gang out of the kid at the same time you move them, all you do is transfer them. Then the third way is what I call teenage mutant gangsters, spontaneous growth, no connection to any of the hardcore gangs anywhere. They just see it in the movies maybe, and they begin to do it. A lot of people call those guys wannabes. I don't like that term. I call them gonna-bees, because if there's not an intervention, they will be a gangster. And wannabes is, you know, if you tell somebody, they ask, say a parent calls the superintendent of schools, and the superintendent says, oh, we don't have real gangs, we just have wannabes. Well, the parent goes, oh, well, they just have, you know, we don't need to worry so much about that. Right. But this is a community issue. Everybody in the community has to be involved. It starts at home.
It's kind of like, sounds like it's sort of like a skin cancer, and it's easy just to keep ignoring it. Pretty soon it turns into melanoma, and boy, you can't...
That is a perfect analogy, and I use the cancer analogy a lot because many times what communities have a tendency to do is treat the cancer pain. They treat the symptoms. You know, they build a jail, they hire a cop, and they do those sorts of things when they're not really targeting the real cancer. Sooner or later, you have to go after the cancer, and that's the intervention and prevention. That's the competing for our kids. That's making the young people understand that we have positive things in this community for you to do. Now all you have to do is ask for them, and we will give them to you.
Well, Steve, this is fascinating, but we're going to take a short break now, and when we return, we're going to talk some more about the underlying causes and the successful efforts that communities have used to eradicate gang activity. We're back for the second half of our program with Steve Novacek, Director of the Mayor's Office for Youth Services for North Little Rock, Arkansas. Steve is visiting Springfield to share the expertise he's developed in addressing gang issues. Steve, before the break, you were talking about the dynamics of some of this gang activity. Is there an action plan that you can follow as a community? Are there best practices that you would urge a community to get on top of this?
There is an action plan. It actually spells the word action. You, of course, have to have after-school programs. That's something that is so critical. We know that the highest time for juvenile crime is the latchkey hours, between 3 and 7 o'clock. So after-school programs are critical to get kids straight from the school into some sort of a program to keep them busy. Then the C in the action plan is community-oriented policing. I think that is a critical need in every neighborhood, that the police know who belongs there, the police know who doesn't belong there, the neighbors all know the police officers in that community. And one of the things that's happened over the years, Mayor, is that many of the intervention and prevention programs are being defunded at the federal level. So that's leaving it up to the communities to step up to the plate to refill those things, and it's critical. And the community-oriented policing program was one of those that they began to take money out of, but there are creative things that communities can do to deal with that. Then you have to have teams for parents, support teams. There has to be a mechanism in place that has parents who've been there and done that. Your superintendent of schools here is a great resource, Dr. Ritter,
right.
because Dr. Ritter actually worked in Omaha where a program was started called Mad Dads, where a group of parents got together, primarily fathers, and they just got sick of the killing.
Now, you talk about fathers. Fathers are almost more important in this issue than the moms,
yes,
aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Why is that?
Fathers have a huge role to play. I don't know, and you know, a lot of these young people that come from the 5-H club that I told you about earlier come from homes many times that the mothers are involved. So a lot of families, just for whatever the reason, don't have fathers.
Just don't have a male role model.
They don't have a male role model, and that's another part of the action plan is the one-on-one or the big brothers, big sisters, mentoring. That's a huge part of it. So you got teams for parents. Then you have in-school programs such as the one that Community Partnership brought me here to do, an anti-violence program. And also several of the schools have peer mediators, conflict mediators within the school. That is a hugely successful program. One-on-ones like I've talked about, and then neighborhood action groups, neighborhood watch groups, neighborhood groups that are involved that know what children belong there. You know, we were talking...
I'd like just to make a point here. The focus of your being here is, of course, dealing with the gang issue. But it seems to me if a community would get behind something like this, you're going to do more than just keep kids out of gangs.
Yes.
You're going to channel them into a much better future.
Positive. You're going to channel them into positive paths rather than negative paths. Let me give you an example. Our city, Mayor Patrick Hayes in the city of North Little Rock, Arkansas, is very big on collaborative efforts. And one of the collaborations that we entered into several years ago was with the Police Athletic League. We are the only community in the state of Arkansas that has a Police Athletic League. The Police Athletic League has been around for a century. It was in New York City at the end of the 1800s, and it's been in larger communities for years. There is a national PAL organization. There are huge assets and resources available to communities that start PAL leagues. Well, we started a PAL league. Our city attorney, Paul Susky, several years ago started the Police Athletic League, and then 4 years ago we partnered with not only the Police Athletic League, but the city gave them a community center that we were not using. And also the Boys and Girls Club entered into it to run the facility. So here we have the police, we have the city that's involved because we give them the building, we pay the utilities, and then the Boys and Girls Club. Now, the first summer we were opened at the Police Athletic League Center, which opened up in an underserved part of our community, we expected 100 kids to show up that day. Over 300 showed up.
My gosh.
We had to mobilize the community. We had to get volunteers in. I had a couple of interns that year. The PAL Center called. They said, we need help. I lost those interns. I never saw them the rest of the summer. Excuse me. We sent them to the PAL Center. Well, let me tell you the tangible that happened. The first summer that the PAL Center was open, we reduced juvenile crime in that part of our community 70%. Now, everybody wants tangibles. They want to hear tangibles.
Right.
It was so successful, reduced it 70%. We've kept that facility open, and we've kept those numbers down. Now, the numbers crept up in the other parts of our community, but in that particular part of the community where that PAL Center is, we have those kids in there day in and day out, up to 300 and 400 a day. We've kept that, we've reduced that juvenile crime. Parents are amazed. Business owners are amazed. The first summer we were open, I was there and business people came in. They said, where in the world have all the trouble, where have all the troublemakers gone? These people who were being shoplifted, kids were hanging out, bothering their shoppers. And I told them, I said, you know, in the summer, kids want to go where it's cool, so they go to the malls. They want to go where it's warm in the winter, so they hang out in the stores. But this provided them the opportunity. Even the patrol officers, the normal street officers who didn't work in the PAL program, they came and they wanted to see where all their troublemakers went. They weren't standing on the street corners anymore. We had them in the PAL Center, offering them positive role models, policemen in there working with them in a positive environment. And not only is it athletics, but we've got computer, reading classes. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, quilting classes for the girls. It's an amazing thing to see, Mayor. And that was a small collaboration of people who got together.
No,
we also,
exciting.
it is exciting. We had another program where people always say, you know, the religious community, the faith-based community needs to be involved. We had a little program called the Our Club, which was foundering, which was funded by the county. The money had been taken away from them. They were going away. This former gang leader who now runs this Our Club intervention program maybe had 5 kids because that's all the resources he had. One day, a minister of one of our large white churches in town came to me, and he was looking for a building. He said, we want to build a teen center. And I said, well, Reverend, we don't have any other buildings, but let me take you and show you this little program that we've got going on. I took him to that program. It took him 15 minutes. He said, you can forget about me wanting a building. I want to get involved with this program right here. So this large Methodist church, I call them country club churches, you know, huge basis, lots of money in this church, 2,000 members. They adopted this little bitty Hour Club. They formed a nonprofit. They adopted this little Hour Club. Now that Hour Club has 2 sites. It has over 80 kids every day that participate in those activities that are from the poorest, hardest part of our community. A former gang leader and a former nun operate this program. It's amazing to see those dynamics. But they are supported wholly, 100% by this church and this little butterfly ministry that they formed, which was a nonprofit. Now, that didn't take one tax dollar. That was a group of people who saw a need, jumped in and said, we want to do something about it. Not only do they help financially, but they have retired school teachers, retired businessmen, retired politicians who go day in and day out down to that program, and they do the one-on-one with the kids. You know, so our action plan is put together in an amazing way in our community.
You know, you've talked a lot about what I think, or I would call a preventative model on so many of these things. Here in our community, several years ago, we built a new jail with 500 beds, and we said that would serve us well for many, many years.
It's full the day it opened, wasn't it?
It is. And I don't know the number, but it's something like $25,000 per prisoner,
right,
to keep them there. And, you know, they're saying, gee, we need to have, we need to expand the jail. Is that the best way to spend
no,
our
you
money?
Can't build you can't build yourself out of this problem by building jails. I mean, true enough, there is a need for jails because, unfortunately, there's some bad people that we just cannot reach. I don't care how hard you try to reach them. If a person does not want to help themselves, there's nothing you can do for them.
You just need to lock them up till
you need to lock them up till they do. And prisons don't rehabilitate people. People rehabilitate themselves in prison. So you can build all the jails you want, and that's not going to work. But if you've got one person that wants to help themselves, that's their help is being inhibited because there's somebody in front of them that doesn't want to help themselves, that's a horrible message to send. But that's what I told every student that I spoke to here. I said, listen, if you want to help yourself, there's help for you. If you don't want to help yourself, get out of the way because there's somebody behind you that needs the help, wants the help, and can't get the help because you're in the way. So once the community recognizes that and balances those two things, you'll be all right.
Well, Steve, if you were going to take a community our size, and I'll just throw a number out of the air and say, hey, we're going to give you $3 or $4 million a year to work on these kinds of issues, where would you spend it?
I would spend it on after-school programs, I would spend it on mentoring programs, and I would spend it on positive activities for the kids to be involved. Now, I would give a little bit to the police and the courts because there are some that you're just going to have to deal with. But $3 or $4 million, you could make this community where a child would want to move here. You would have parents wanting to come here and bring their children here because of the positive things that are going on. You already have those. And I think one of the things that, the other thing that a community has to do, we call it the circle of life in our community. The circle of life, in the center is our office, the Mayor's Office of Youth Services. We also have what we call in our community a Youth Services Advisory Council, which consists of everybody in our community that's part of the solution. We've got your business leaders, we've got your government leaders, we've got your churches, we've got everybody in the community on this little spoke that's involved. We meet once a month, our Mayor's Youth Services Advisory Council does, and we study issues and we make solutions to issues. So you have to share information. That's a critical part. One of the things that I tell communities over and over is that we in the community as the adults must quit fighting amongst ourselves. We have to understand that turf battles are something that children watch. And when the children of your community watch the adults in the community not able to sit down at the table and fix these problems, they say, well, you know, why should we do it if our adults can't do it, if our adults won't do it?
Our area right here is what they call the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, is about 400,000 people. There are 150,000 people, more or less, that live here in Springfield, 250,000 in the county, and then we take in the surrounding counties, some bedroom communities. I guess the one question I want to ask is, can you run away from this problem? If you've got a family, can I move out to the little bedroom community and say, hey, my kid isn't going to be touched by this?
No, we need to improve, not move. That's my opinion. I think every community needs to improve their community, improve the things that are going on for their community. And the other thing about, remember I told you a lot of communities the gangs are transferred in. That's the way it happens. We had a little small bedroom community recently we spoke at, and we were talking about one of our particular gangs, the Knockout Kings, and a woman said, my son talks about the Knockout Kings. We moved away from Little Rock to get away from it. I said, you're not going to get away from it, because people that are moving away from it, if they don't take the gang out of the kid at the same time they're taking the kid out of the gang, they're just moving them there. So you can't move away from it. You need to improve, not move.
Steve, I want to thank you for being here today. You obviously have a great commitment to your mission here. I think you're making a difference. We're going to be talking a lot about the ideas that you've left us with here in our community. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. And anybody that wants to can email me or use my website. It's gangwar.com, GANGWAR.com. They can email me off that, and I'll be happy to help anybody any way that I can.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I want to thank you for joining me today for this edition of the Mayor's Roundtable. Until next time, that's the view from City Hall.